share it with me if I'm going to show video. But yeah, feel free to record. So Dave, I honestly, although it's lovely that you are listening to these people, that isn't what I would recommend, because you're correct. A lot of people will find that infuriating. The best thing to do when you find a strong Trump supporter is not to stay on the call. The best thing is, if necessary, interrupt and say thank you so much, and then hang up. But especially if you're calling people you know, you're not going to interrupt and hang up, but you still might listen. But the moment they pause, you're going to say thanks so much. I have everything I need. Because otherwise, you're right. You're going to have a lot of people who are so upset by a relatively small number of the calls that you won't even get the chance to debrief the successful calls. So yeah, try not to focus on the people who are impossible. You have more than 1 million of them in your state, but that's okay, right? You also have a lot of great people.
Yeah, and Dave, I agree with you, but I think that even your people kind of know this is like a robocall coming in, and right away they're, you know, as soon as they pick up the receiver, they're just on you. And I think you hardly have a chance to say thanks, I got what I need, goodbye.
Well, you can just hang up if you have to. Seriously.
Right.
Hey, Dave,
Right,
I apologize, but we are trying to keep the focus on planning for our next events and in August to try to be effective. So that's such a good question. But Jen had a question next, so if that's okay.
Let's move on.
Go to Jen's question. Thank you, Dave.
Yes. So are you calling people you know, or are you calling strangers?
Yeah, we're calling strangers this weekend, I believe, but we will have a list of people we know that is sourced, like acquaintances, business contacts. We're going to ask everyone who is volunteering to provide friends and neighbor contacts that they could call themselves or we could call, but we're going to be building a community list of people that are both infrequent voters and likely volunteers.
Well, so the goal depends on what list you're calling. And the reason why I'm going to encourage you as much as you can to have people call people they know. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to call people Diana knows. I want to call people I know. If I call people I know and I text them a couple days in advance, letting them know I'm going to call at this time and is that a good time? Mm-hmm. If I do that, almost 100% of them are going to pick up the phone. And then what we've learned is almost 100% of them are going to have a full conversation with me. And so if your shift of calling is about an hour and a half long, I don't know the exact amount of time you're planning, but if it is, you might have 5 completed calls in an hour and a half, maybe even 5 or 6, where you really do the whole thing. That's great. That's about as good as it gets, because these calls take 10 or 15 minutes. So now here's the problem. When you're calling strangers, people you don't know, you have no way to text them in advance. They don't know who you are. And so the pickup rate is not close to 100%. Depending on how well your voter list is maintained and how rapidly people move in and out of your area, you might find that the pickup rate is 5 or 10%. The best it'll be is 20%. Voter lists decay at the rate of about 25% a year. And so that's why it's the list that's the problem. a lot of the phone numbers on it are wrong. So instead of and then when you get people on the phone, because they don't know you, you also don't have a nearly 100% completion rate. It's lower. Even if it's a third of the people completing the call with you, all of a sudden you realize in Pennsylvania, what we're averaging right now, and this is after they've been doing this for a couple months, so they've improved. They averaged this past Sunday 1.7 completed calls.
In an hour? Or
In
how
an
long?
hour and a half of calling.
Okay.
So they get literally a third as much done. It's like you get done as much. If you call people you know, you get more done in an hour than if somebody's calling strangers for 3 hours. So it's not that you never call strangers, but this goes to the goal setting you're asking about, Jen. And I would just be very honest with people about this, because then people who start out thinking, well, I'd prefer to call strangers, I will tell you, once you've been on the phone for an hour and a half and had one completed call, you don't want to do it again. It's no fun dialing and dialing. So it'll motivate people if you tell them right up front, you have a choice. Here's the choice we hope you'll consider, because you'll be more productive, you'll make more of a difference, and you will enjoy it more.
So, Dave, in other campaigns, have you seen like a concerted effort? Is it reasonably close to being as effective if I were to call somebody and say, hey, I'm friends with Diana, she gave me your number. What I'm hearing here is the capacity for branching out and making phone calls in would be limited to how many people we get calling and what the list that they come up with is.
Well, Casey, the answer is I don't know. And I don't know because I don't know Dunn County well enough. In other words, in Los Angeles, that would work not so well, right? If I called somebody and said, hi, Casey, and I are friends, that might or might not work. Now in Dunn County, it might work because they might vaguely know me, right? But my best bet will be if I text them a couple days in advance and I say, I know you're good friends with Casey, and she and I are working together on a campaign, and she asked if I would give you a call. Would it be okay if I give you a call on Saturday at this time? That'll tell you a lot, because if I texted people with that message and they don't write me back, it's going to be, they may not pick up. Whereas if they text me back and say, okay, I'll give you a couple minutes, then we're in good shape. So try it, but you might discover it works and you might discover it doesn't. Diana, are we staying focused on what you need us? Feel free to push me in a certain direction.
A planning question at all? My feeling about the list is to achieve our goals, we're going to have to do all things. Like we're going to have van access and we're going to make phone calls and we're going to call people we know. And we're going to call, because we're going to also ask people to help us find infrequent voters, because if we don't get to doors, we're going to have to try to do that. So I believe Dave each got 8 names from someone, and one of those calls resulted in him having a big change in the 1 to 10 scale for a voter. So I think we don't want to, but I think Dave's advice is so important to be like, yeah, this is what's most effective, is calling people that you have an existing relationship with. So like, okay. And that people will also feel better coming out of the canvases if they're doing at least some of those calls, so that they're not just stuck on the dialer all the time.
Okay, and a point of clarification, Dave, are you recommending that we do this in like training and as callers are making their first few calls and then branching out to a list after that? Or would you say ideally for the most effective way to do it is to try to actually keep reaching out to people that we know throughout the whole campaign and using the voter list too when we run out?
Well, I mean, I think in the beginning, as many people as are willing to call people they know, that's going to be your best bet. It's your best bet also because as you're trying to develop your coaches, the way you become a good coach is you get to do a bunch of these conversations. It's hard to become a good coach if you only have one conversation in a shift. But if you have 5 conversations, you get a lot better. You'll even notice that you're better on your 5th call than you were on the first call. So I think especially at the beginning to develop your coaching team, this is good. Now, it's going to vary though. If somebody just moved to Dunn County last week and they don't know anybody, then they call the voter list. If you're somebody like John Calabrese and you realize he's realizing, I think he's got 50 or 100 people to call, then I would say keep calling people you know. Some of you might feel like, oh, I have 3 people I know, I'll call them, then I'll call the voter list. So I would just encourage people to incorporate as much of this as they can.
Yeah.
And the thing that I can send you, you know how John wrote up his experience, which sort of made him realize he hadn't even thought of all the people he could call? I can send you a couple of other, I'm asking in each phone bank for some volunteers who have interesting calls to write them up. So I have 3 different ones I can send you. And what's fascinating is they're so different from each other, but what they have in common is each case, they called a very unlikely person. It's somebody they know, but not somebody they think of every day. And that really was productive. So if you remind me at the end of this, Diana, I can send you that. You can share those. 2 of these are written up, I think, by people in Wisconsin, 1 by somebody in Pennsylvania. It'll help. And what you need to do in your training is take the time to help people really think about who they know, because the very first people they will think of may be people who vote all the time, but that's not everybody they know.
David, can I ask a question? Mary Bear. When we do this coaching model and we've established our team of coaches, the 15 well-trained coaches, when we have our volunteers, will it be important for them, that one volunteer to have one coach to go to if they have questions, rather than, let's say we have 15 and we say, we're your coaches, but then they run into a problem when they're calling? It seems to me that it would be important to give people like we set it up, our volunteers in kind of groups, and say, this is your contact coach, this is your contact coach. So they don't have questions where to go if they have issues. Thoughts on that?
Mary, I don't know. There are pros and cons. The big advantage is continuity, which you're getting at.
Right.
The big disadvantage is you're going to be a great coach for some people, or I'll be honest with me. I'm a great coach for some people, and then some people just hate my coaching. Right?
Good point. Yeah.
No, it's all right. Right? In other words, part of this is personality, right?
Yep.
Jen, you and Casey and I are going to find that somebody that I'm a terrible coach for is going to love one of you. And somebody's going to hate Casey and love Jen and me, right? And you need to not take it personally. When people are scared, they need to like the person and they have to feel connected to the person coaching them. So to me, it's better if somebody is working with Jan one week or at the story workshop, maybe, that person's going to be better off getting coaching from Diana on the day of, because then, right, if somebody did feel like a coach didn't understand them, they don't feel like they've entered into a wedding and now till death do they part, they've got to put up with this. So that would be my recommendation. The other thing, Mary, is you're going to be continually developing new coaches, in part because things are going to come up. Somebody's going to be a great coach in the first week of September, and their kid's going to break both their legs, and they're going to be unable to be available the next 2 phone banks. And so there's going to be some turnover. So if people feel permanently assigned, you're going to end up reassigning some anyway. So anyway, there's...
Great points. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have a question from Jen next who's been waiting.
Thank you.
Cool.
I just to add to Mary's question to that discussion is it's really cool to get coached by different people too, just because I learned different things. So that I wouldn't want to be limited, but okay. So the coaching, if we're trying to get to 60 canvassers by September, we already have 20 coaches right now, or 20 callers, however you want to look at it. We're not going to try to coach 60 new volunteers, are we, in September? We're just trying to get to that number of 60 volunteers.
Yeah.
So then would we necessarily need to have 15 coaches on hand, or would we just need to have enough for the amount of the groups that were, there's just something I got confused about. And
I'll just clarify that the numbers are that we will have 120 volunteers total trained, and we'll have 60 volunteer shifts per week, because not everyone will continue throughout the entire project, and not everyone will be able to come to every shift. Sorry to interrupt, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah. Jen, I think everybody needs coaching. Coaches.
well, that's part of,
I need coaching.
yeah.
And
Sure.
no, it's because there's always room to improve, but also all of us at times get stuck. You know, I'll have a conversation where I can't figure out exactly what went wrong, and so the more I'm practicing with other coaches, the better. So that's why, I don't know if you noticed, but I canvass every time we canvass. I phone bank every time we phone bank. I role play just like everybody else. So I would just say, if you're going to have 60 participants, you're going to want at least 15 coaches. And by the way, it's no problem. In fact, the best result we ever get at the lab is honestly when half the participants are capable coaches. Then you can do a piece of the training in pairs, where everybody who's not yet a coach is with a coach. Oh my God, that really helps the most. But you can do fine in groups of 4 and 5. So yeah, it'd be great if where you end up by election day is you have 60 coaches for the future.
Well, and so what I think that I'm starting to hear then more clearly is, and this is something that Casey and David H are thinking about, is we keep coaching each other throughout the process. You don't get trained as a deep canvasser and then you just keep canvassing, which will give you practice, but there's like, Casey, I'll just share a little bit about some of your ideas. Is you go to these happy hours with other canvassers, and you can practice. You share stories about what it's been like canvassing. Like, so there's continual education, professional development, if you want to call it, throughout. Is that what you're? Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Exactly right.
Cool.
Yeah, Casey, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, this actually just flips 360 what I have been thinking so far. And what Dave and I have been talking about is he and I are in our group, David and I are taking the role of coaching volunteers and supporting volunteers. But what I'm hearing today is, and actually that's a little overwhelming for me. That part of it is overwhelming. But what I'm hearing you saying, it makes perfect sense to me, Dave, is that we actually need to expand it. We need a real focus on solidly trained coaches and a support system of that for each other, because that will expand our capacity to have really good coaching for the rest of the people. And I have to tell you, that flips my whole thinking to think, wow, we could have concerted efforts just a couple times to train the coaches and make sure that we're helping each other and get a little solidarity on a team of coaches. But then my second thing goes immediately to I hear what you're saying about doing it is good. But I know Bill helped me with my story for this other project that we had. And the way that he questioned seemed like it was so informed, and he seemed like he really knew where he was going with it. So I'm thinking of reaching out to Bill for coaching advice. But is there anything, is this like a separate conversation? It does make me think, where can we start at for a good foundation of coaching training? Or what are just some good practices about when you're coaching and coaching somebody with a story or a phone call? Or I know that's a really big question, but
No, I'll just give you quick ideas here. Yes, ask Bill for help. Ask Dan Grandoni for help. Ask Mark Fraley for help, right? In other words, you have a lot of very capable people who can coach you, who are right there in Wisconsin. And then I would probably see if one of my colleagues, like Jordan, might have time. If you needed somebody not from Wisconsin, but ask your Wisconsin people first. That's my thought. But yes. And by the way, the other advantage of having as many coaches as you can, let's say we get to the final few weeks before Election Day and the country's in an uproar, which is where I think we're going to be. You might have some very large number of people come to volunteer close to the end, really out of panic, because it's potentially going to be a very close election, and very, very close in your state. If you had 40 people show up who were totally new, but you had plenty of coaches for them, they would do an excellent job right away. What goes wrong in a lot of campaigns is a lot of people come in at the end, but there's really not the coaching capacity. So the campaign's like a sieve. New volunteers come in and then they exit because really they didn't have a good experience. But with a big enough group of coaches, really you are very likely to give everybody a great experience.
With that, David, okay, that makes perfect sense to me. And I'm a big advocate of training, and I'm a big advocate of making sure that I have your back. If you're going to be volunteering for me, I'm going to give you everything you need to be confident to do that. So this is really clicking with me. What I was, a question that comes to mind is, if we do have, say we did have a big influx of people that wanted to help at the last minute, how does our ongoing training of deep canvassers fit into, like when we had the experience with you, we did the workshop on one night and then the longer training on Saturday, and it was very rich and it gave us a really good foundation of that. Do you recommend us going forward with, when we want to build capacity and build more training, kind of sticking to that framework that you set up, or should we do some one-on-one coaching and allow people to come to our canvases and coach them on that day, or have a condensed version?
I would schedule training. If you're canvassing every Saturday, I would have training every Wednesday night and training on Saturday. Your coaches, by the way, as first they're going to become good coaches, then they're going to become good co-trainers. And, but yeah, try not to do this individually because you won't have enough time. So occasionally, if somebody really needs individual time, do it. But it's better to try to have a system and then see if people can adapt to it. And of course, some people won't be able to. If I work Wednesday night every Wednesday, I can't come. Then maybe you're going to figure out something for me. But more likely, maybe
Okay.
1 week, you'll do the Wednesday night training on both Wednesday and Thursday. So somebody like me can come.
Okay, so best practice though, the most effective thing to do is to kind of stick with this separate focus on your story, and then, or I mean, what you've found so far.
Well,
then
that
the training.
seems to work the best, but feel free to try it all on one day. It's just a very long day.
But
So
you're saying don't condense it. Keep that content and keep that, because it's tested and it works.
Yeah, I think you're going to be happier
Okay,
because
I'm into that.
Well, otherwise, people are going to struggle on the calls in very predictable ways. The things you no longer train on, they will not be able to do.
That's true. Yeah.
You know, it's like if you took driver's ed and they left out brakes, it's kind of predictable the problems you would have when you're driving. So, yeah.
And so the other groups that you work with just kind of take the structure that you have in the agenda for the 2 training days and use that to do their training.
Well, that's working well in Pennsylvania right now.
Okay, that's good to know.
But you're going to learn what works for you. If it doesn't work for you, then try an alternative. But yeah, it's worked better for us than, I mean, we've tried a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've landed here because this works. We used to do it all in one day. We really, you know, if people came to Orange County, they were with us. They had to get up in the morning at 7 a.m. and they would get home at 7 p.m. But that's hard. Not everybody can do that. Diana, how are we doing in terms of focus?
I think we're good. And I just wanted to say that I think that some people are going to want to keep doing story workshops. Like both Bill and John Calabrese have said how valuable that is for them. And I think some people are going to take 2 or 3 story workshops and then they'll feel pretty good and just be doing calls during the weekend canvases. And we're also going to allow people to make calls on their own time. And so I think that that'll be great. And then we just had a really great question from Jen in the chat to Dave. So what do you think our deep canvas team structure might look like, or what is it looking like in Pennsylvania? Like what roles are you finding are necessary to support the project from beginning to end?
Well, you need a recruitment team. And it's probably the biggest team. And we could have a whole discussion just about that, but you probably already know a lot about how you want to recruit. But it's time consuming. People have a lot of questions. People who've never done this before have all kinds of questions. So you want to have a recruitment team for sure. You need to have a coaching team, somebody who's checking in with the coaches to see if they like coaching. Because what if Jan is a great coach, but after doing it a few weeks is sick of it? She teaches all the time anyway. She just wants to come and get on the phone and not coach anymore. Then you shouldn't. She shouldn't do what she is not enthused about doing. On the other hand, maybe that's not the issue. Maybe Jan is sick of coaching because there's some problems she notices people have, and she doesn't seem to be able to help certain people solve their problems. Then Jan really just needs support from other coaches, giving her additional ideas about that she could try to see if she can become better as a coach for a wider range of people. So a coaching team, and whether it's organizing coaches' happy hours like Jen said, or organizing something more formal, it doesn't matter. You'll figure out what helps your coaches feel supported. You need a logistics team. If you're working with the voter list and calling that list, figuring out how to make sure that you're spending as little time as possible calling Trump supporters and as much time as possible reaching infrequent voters who are on our side. That really, it seems like you would solve the problem once and be done with it, but that is not the case. It turns out it's a hard problem. And then you're going to need a training team, somebody really thinking about coordinating the story workshop and leading it, and coordinating the day of training and leading it, and leading the debrief. So at the very least, you're going to need those teams. But they're not equal in size. Does that give you enough to go on, or did you want more?
Could you say a little more about the recruitment team, please?
Yeah, so you're going to begin with people who have already been active in campaigns or community, charitable good works, right? Those are going to be the first people you think to ask. Some of them are the people who've come forward already. But you have a lot of people in your community not in that category who would love to help. And the question is, how do you find them? And so there are a lot of different things you could try to recruit them. One thing you could do is pull together everybody who's involved and have them really think through who they know, who's not involved, who really passionately shares that belief that Donald Trump has got to be defeated. Because if you call somebody up who feels passionately about that, and you say, look, I don't know if you've ever volunteered before, have you? And they say no. Or yes, long ago when I was in college, or whatever, you know, I mean, you can describe what you're doing and ask them to help. So asking people you know who are not involved, who you know feel passionately about this cause, that's going to greatly expand the reach of people you could ask. The other things, I don't know Dunn County, right? But there might be some groups in Dunn County where you'd like to reach out to them to see if this is a project where they'd like to collaborate with you. So you could do that as well. So all of a sudden, even if you only did those two things, Jen, you can appreciate that that's a lot of what I would call external recruitment. You're going outside the group of people you already have. But there's another part of the recruitment team, and that's internal recruitment. That is working with the people who already said they want to help or they've helped, but signing them up for a specific shift when they are next coming in. So it's almost like you have 3 different committees within the recruitment committee. External recruitment to individuals that people know, external recruitment to groups that might be sympathetic and want to help, and internal recruitment. And all of those are really time-consuming things to do. That's why your recruitment committee is probably going to be as big as all the other committees combined. And if you're in the fortunate position to hire people, what I would tell anybody who's full-time on this campaign is think of your job as 75% recruitment. Yeah, because without people, what are you doing?
Wow, David, this is amazing because I reached out to 2 churches in town that are very liberal. So I've been working on recruitment, but I also have been working on trying to make communication with the volunteers and then also coach. And what I'm hearing from you is all those are such valid things to have a concerted effort for those. This is so valuable to me, this information. So I thank you so much. I think it's mind-blowing to me, actually.
Oh, great. Diana, I know we're down to the last few minutes. So what have we not gotten to that is super important that we get to? I think you might be.
Yeah, Jan, did you have anything that you wanted to add? We haven't really heard from you or Elizabeth much, or I guess we did hear a question from Mary. I feel like we've covered a lot of great ground, Dave, and this is super helpful for our planning coming up. So, yeah.
I have one question for Dave, and that's maybe I missed this, but where would the follow-up with voters when we make these phone bank calls? Where would the follow-up be for the voters who need help with registration or voting by mail or that kind of thing?
Oh.
Where would that fall? Just curious.
Yeah, I think that's a decision you folks need to figure out, and that's going to be very Wisconsin specific. Your state has really burdened voter registration. It's much harder to register to vote in Wisconsin than most states. So people will need help, and they'll also need help signing up for vote by mail. My goal, if I was in your shoes, would be that every single voter we talk with, whether we're calling people we know or whether we're calling strangers, would be to ask them and make sure that they are registered to vote at the address they currently live at. And the reason that's so important is they need to do that before they can sign up for vote by mail. Otherwise, the mail ballot is not going to get to them.
Right.
And so you're totally right, Mary. They're going to need this help. So that's why your phone calls, I think, are going to take 15 or 20 minutes. In other words, it's going to take you a minute or two when you're calling people you know just to say hello and how are you and all that. It's going to take a couple minutes for you to tell your story. It's going to take maybe 4 minutes to elicit their story. That's only an 8-minute call, but you're going to need 8 more minutes just to solve the problems of voter registration and vote by mail with a lot of these people. Not everybody. Somebody who hasn't moved and votes, even if they vote infrequently, but they're registered where they live, and they voted by mail before, boy, that's not as hard. But somebody who has moved and they never changed their voter registration because they last voted in 2012 because they liked Obama, but they weren't excited by Clinton. Oh my God, you got to get them to re-register. You got to get them to fill out vote by mail. This is maybe going to take you half an hour. And it's worth it because then you've got this voter. In addition, Mary, maybe you're getting at this too. When you sign people up for vote by mail, the key is when ballots get mailed out, you need to call all these people back and ask them, did they get their ballot? Right? And if they got it, you ask them to open it and look at it. And you want them to vote the whole ballot. Many infrequent voters, they don't do that. So you want to help them. You want to demystify this thing that looks long and complicated. And that's a longer discussion than we have time for today. But it's really good you're thinking about how much follow-up is involved, because ultimately what counts, Mary, is how many people did you help vote who otherwise were at high risk of not voting?
So it's really a part one, part two. There's the, are you registered? Are you, the telling the story, and then that follow-up call once we know ballots have been mailed out. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, that's right. And the reason why you need to do all these parts, a lot of people are tempted to skip the storytelling part and just get right to the logistical problems. But usually the logistical problems, people are terrible at solving them if they're not self-motivated to vote. If they really want to vote, then working together, we can solve these problems. But if they're only mildly interested in voting, if you haven't helped them realize that they care more about this, boy, one of the saddest conversations any of our volunteers at the Leadership Lab had in 2018, a volunteers of ours, Amir, right? We were calling people back, their ballots had just arrived, and a voter that we had canvassed, Amir reached him on the phone, asked if they got the ballot. The voter said they weren't going to vote. And Amir tried to say, well, why? And the voter said, look, I've already thrown the ballot in the trash. Right? And what that means to me is our volunteer who deep canvassed them at the door didn't really deep canvass. They really just signed somebody up for vote by mail without helping them realize that voting was something they cared about. So it's easy to focus too much on the logistical problems. There's no point getting there till you solve the motivation problem when you're talking to infrequent voters. On the other hand, the motivation problem, once you solve it, you totally want to get to these logistical problems. People do need some help with them. So we got to do both.
That's really interesting, Dave. I just wrote down our job. So like kind of the beacon that we keep looking back to, then we can think about it with deep canvas conversations, is that we are actually helping the voters to realize that they care about voting. At the end of the day, that's really important for me to kind of reiterate and hold on to, that is actually the most impactful thing that we can do, is help them to realize that they care about voting, connecting their stories with the practice of voting.
Well, yes, because you have good fortune in one way, in that you have day of registration and voting in Wisconsin. So if you've motivated somebody, but you've failed at re-registering them, you've failed at vote by mail, you still have a chance at the end if they're motivated.
Yes.
And you call them and they feel like, oh, it's too late. It's not too late in Wisconsin.
It's building your house out of bricks. That the motivation is the pig that built his house out of bricks, right? Yeah. It's the one that you want to go with. Okay, thank you. That's a good reminder.
We're right at 1, and I just had a quick question. So Dave, do you feel that this voter support team is part of the recruitment team?
Well, why don't you start that way?
Mm-hmm. And then if it changes. Yeah.
If you discover you need a separate team, because voter support becomes a big, big challenge that can't be handled as well as you want, then sure. I think you're going to discover, I mean, you may discover that re-registering people to vote is not as big a problem in Dunn County. It may be that a lot of people are registered where they currently live. In Orange County, where we were in California in 2018, it was 50-50. On the south side of Milwaukee, where we canvassed March 7th, almost 100% of the people had to be re-registered.
Yeah, I almost wish we could go to Milwaukee to help with voter support the last couple of days because of the election, because that's like if we all volunteered to be poll workers there, like that's
They
like
need the help.
needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the truth is, where they really need the help, I would say, is if you were going to have a weekend where you went to Milwaukee, obviously coordinated with people in Milwaukee, but the time they need help is, I would say, relatively early in October, when it's still possible to sign up for vote by mail, because I worry a lot about what election day will look like in Milwaukee. If you noticed what happened in the primary, where instead of having 150 polling places citywide, they only had 5 or
Well, and that's
7.
exactly what I mean. Like they said that the reason for that was that there weren't enough poll workers, but I question that just because of the history of the city, if that was the whole story. Yeah.
You know, I'm sad to say that Donald Trump is going to try to foment chaos in cities just like Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Cleveland. This is part of his plan to win these states. So yeah, I'm sorry I got to go. Good luck. Keep me posted. And I'm glad you've got dates scheduled to get started. And you know, seek help in Wisconsin. And if you need help from us, I may or may not be able to help. I moved to Pennsylvania August 10th, but I would try. I just may or may not have time. So, yeah.
Is that a permanent move, Dave?
No.
Or just you're just moving
Through
there?
November 6th.
Oh, I love your commitment. It's inspiring.
Well,
that's really cool.
Yeah. Where else? I mean, can't
that's
stay in
awesome.
California.
I love
Anyway,
it.
see
Great
ya.
seeing you, Dave.
Thank you so much.
Good
Thank you.
luck. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And you've got this, Diana, so you can copy whatever you need from the chat because you're the host now, right?
Yeah, it's good. Thank you so much, Dave.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And everyone can save their chat. There's the 3 horizontal dots on your chat, and there's an option to save chat.
Oh, I've never noticed that before. Great.
You can also copy and paste it into something too, the whole thing. But
Okay. So do we have a consensus about meeting or debriefing?
What's up, Jan?
Casey, your question came first, and then I have a question.
Oh, okay.
No, you first, Casey.
Yeah, so do we have a consensus on a time? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Do we want to debrief this? Because I kind of feel, if I'm not mistaken, where my head is going is that we actually might even consider our roles differently. But maybe I'm jumping off the boat. But everything that he said today actually is a shift. And when we decided our roles, I kind of feel like we did the best that we could at the time for what we would anticipate our needs would be. But this kind of made sense to me, and it makes me wonder if restructuring our roles a little bit, like thinking about the voter follow-up. And I just think Elizabeth is on it with like all the rules with voting and absentee ballots. She would be such a good person for, but is that crazy to even think that we should scramble it up at this point? So I don't know, but that's just
Well, I think there's limited time, and there's limited. We are a limited group. We need to expand our group partly, but that's why I think Diana was saying make weekly coaching part of our training, like on Thursday, for example, and then maybe even a little segment of the canvassing could be something, training or storytelling. But basically, I think the other thing I think that's really important, and I felt like is a gap, is this training to action, because people are going to get kind of like cold feet and say, I can't do this, like we could train people, but if we wait too long to have them, like Dave went in Milwaukee, he went out canvassing right away. So you didn't have time to be afraid or think about it. You just did it. And I really think something like that is important.
And just to point out, we did have a very low percentage of people who didn't do the action this last time. We had people, but it wasn't.
Okay.
So that was good that we had that action. I think that we need to be thinking flexibly in general about our roles, and especially if the funding is something that we decide to go forward with, and that we get, then we're going to have employees.
So like tomorrow we might find out more about the funding, hopefully, right? That's the plan.
Next week. And I really like the idea of like teams, like grouping it in that way that Dave was talking about, because it does feel more flexible and more open to allowing more people to join.
Yeah.
And then Jan, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Diane, thanks for facilitating this. It was very helpful
Yes.
to talk with
Super
Dave,
helpful.
because
Right.
everybody's learning this stuff all over the country. But one thing I would love to know is, are people starting to do door to door? And
Yeah.
we had a canvasser come to our door the other day without wearing a mask.
Oh.
And as soon as I saw through the window that it was somebody ringing my doorbell without a mask on, I was automatically, I don't want to talk to this guy. And it turns out he was a Trump canvasser anyway, so I really didn't want to talk to him. But it really, I think we need to constantly be evaluating the status of the world as far as door-to-door canvassing.
Yeah, and Dave is really recommending that we do it, and it's what they're doing in Pennsylvania, and they hired an infectious disease expert, and I think that's what he had kind of planned on talking to us about, but I think we can still have access to that information.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the Wisconsin Democratic Party platform has decided it's going to be digital only organizing as like a stand. And so, but that doesn't mean that has to be the case for our group, but I think it's something we would have to decide about moving forward, because I do think Dave is correct that is the most effective way to reach new and infrequent voters, is door to door or tabling. But I also feel like, the risks are real, and also like who do we stand for, and how does that relate to it? So is the question that, and I'm very late, so I totally apologize, but I love you all, and thank you so much for coming. I think this was really great.
Maybe tomorrow if anybody can. We'll see.
Yep, I'll see you.
Who will send out a Zoom meeting for tomorrow? Are we going to meet tomorrow?
I would
We
like
got to
to.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, and who wants to send out the invitation for that?
Well,
Because
we'll say goodbye to Diana